The outgoing Trump administration's budget proposal for the department for fiscal 2021 includes getting rid of the overseas contingency operations budget and moving that money into the regular budget. It's one potential change to thinking about the way the Defense Department budgets. Elaine McCusker is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, former acting Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller, and writing about budget suggestions for the Pentagon in Defense News. Welcome. Thanks very much for coming on the program, Elaine. You write in this piece, it's time for a responsive and resilient approach to the budget. What does resilient mean in the context of a department's budget?
Well, thanks for having me on to talk about this. I think what I mean by resilience is that right now we have very little predictability in the budget. We don't have a budget top line deal. We have a history of more than a decade of continuing resolutions. And I think people may not fully appreciate the impact of those continuing resolutions. And we also are operating under a really antiquated budget structure and appropriation structure, in some cases dating back to the fiscal year 1942 budget, which is not reflective to the way that programs are executing today. And so what I'd like to see is us make improvements in a number of these areas to really help the department and the taxpayer harness the power of its money.
So I want to walk through each of those, the four things that you write about in this piece, and you've touched on a couple of them already. One of them is budget predictability. Is that entirely up to Congress to signal to the department what it's going to get and how it should plan for it? Or is there an element there of the department too to assist on resilience in budget certainty?
I think it's a partnership. I think in the end, Congress holds the power of the purse, so it's up to them to pass annual appropriation bills on time. But it really has to be a partnership with the department and with the administration to make sure that they have the tools necessary to conduct their oversight function and also to finish their job on time. I think that people may not fully realize the impact, both immediate and cumulative, of more than a decade of budget uncertainty. And by this, I mean, when Congress doesn't pass an appropriations bill by September 30th, they usually pass a continuing resolution, which essentially extends last year's money and priorities into the next year. And so DOD has been operating under these types of continuing resolutions for close to 1,300 days in the last 11 years. A lot of people think that once they pass an annual appropriation bill, then that everything's okay. But during that time that you're under a CR, you lose time and money that you can't buy back. For example, if you've got plans for accelerating your capability or modernizing your equipment, let's say you have an opportunity for research or procurement in hypersonics or microelectronics, or even procurement of aircraft that are good in the counterterrorism fight. If you're under a continuing resolution, you may not be able to execute any of that for 6 months. And then, as a good planner, you start to realize, well, I'm going to be under continuing resolution, so you don't even plan to execute in the beginning of the year. And so you're losing time and money and competitiveness each year that has a cumulative effect. And so to be blunt, you just can't be the best customer or the smartest customer with the best plan with that level of uncertainty.
Elaine, the second item that you write about is clarity on federal spending, and you talk about the budget caps being gone and making this an opportunity to look across the entire landscape of the federal budget. In the time that we have left, I want to move to number 3 and number 4. Number 3 is lessons learned from past budget reductions. What are those lessons, just quickly, that you think people should pay attention to this time around?
So I think there's a couple of traps that we've fallen into in the past that has resulted in readiness disasters, a hollow force, and accidents. And a couple of those traps that I think people need to guard against is the temptation to see the world as we'd like it to be rather than how it is. And so we assume away a threat level and we pretend that our budget and our budget reductions are going to be okay. And we call that the peace dividend. And that's not really what reality reflects. The second way is forcing a choice between capability and capacity, and sometimes we call this the drawdown. That has also not worked in the past. So I think we need to be guard against choices that are that simplistic, where you're choosing between the readiness of the force now or the readiness of the force later. I think we can do a better job of opening up our choices so that we don't see some of the impacts we've seen in the past.
The last item that you write about is modernizing budget structures, and you put it this way. It's time to modernize with simpler, responsive and flexible appropriations that meet congressional oversight requirements. I think that last phrase is the most important one there. Congress, it strikes me, in the past has hesitated to do anything except explicit money giving so that it has complete oversight over where the money goes or where the department wants to move it.
I mean, I think right now we're almost operating in the worst of both worlds, where the department produces reams of information, provides, notifications, and tries to meet all of the requirements that Congress has put on it that are designed to help Congress do its oversight role. And yet we see that Congress is repeatedly unsatisfied with what it considers an insufficient level of detail for it to do its job. So we're wasting a lot of time and money and effort trying to meet a requirement that is not meeting the requirement. And so I think it's time for the Congress and DOD, and to some extent industry plays a part in this too, to get together and decide how we can harness the power of our data, use the things that we're learning from the audit and the way we're able to do more data analytics, and update our resourcing strategies to meet both sides' needs.
Elaine McCusker, thanks very much for coming on. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you.